The pie plates were still warm when I reached for Nico's phone. He'd left it on the counter beside the empty casserole dish, sticky with sweet potatoes. I meant to hand it to him. That was all. Just a reflex. But the screen lit up when I touched it, and one message filled the entire top. Relax, babe. I'll put the old lady in a home after dinner. We'll have the house and her pension before New Year's. I didn't breathe. My hand tightened around the phone not to crush it, but to keep it from shaking. The old lady. That was me. Behind me, the kitchen erupted in laughter. Brenna was telling a story loud and polished. Nico chuckled like he always had when he wanted something. Ellie snorted at something on her tablet. I was still holding the phone when Brenna called over her shoulder. Mom, do we have more whipped cream? I blinked. Yes, I said, placing the phone down, screen dark again. Fridge door left side. My voice didn't crack. My knees did just a little when I turned to the fridge. I moved slowly, afraid even one wrong look might give me away. They didn't notice. Of course they didn't. They passed around plates I'd washed by hand. They leaned back in chairs I bought. They used forks from my wedding set, like it was theirs to own. Not borrow, own. I sat down at the edge of the breakfast nook, hands in my lap. They talked around me like I wasn't there. Maybe in their minds I already wasn't. Nico had always been charming when he wanted to be. And Brenna, she'd always known how to play long games. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision. By the time Brenna started gathering the dessert bowls, I had already made mine. Quiet, but solid. I stood, poured myself some cold coffee, and watched the backyard through the window. This house was never meant to hold so many voices at once. It had been quiet for years. Soft floors, early mornings, coffee alone on the porch. I kept it clean, warm, and paid off just the way Gerald and I always imagined. When Nico called me 2 years ago, voice ragged and proud at the same time, I didn't even hesitate. Of course, I said. He needed a place to land. A few months, he said, until things picked up again. But he didn't come alone. Brenna arrived with 3 suitcases and her mother's piano. Ellie followed behind with earbuds in barely looking up. And just like that, my guest room became Ellie's space. My den turned into their movie room. The sunroom where I kept plants and read late into the day became Brenna's work office. No one asked. They just started using those words until I stopped correcting them. I moved into my old sewing room. The table was too long, so I gave it away. Folded up the fabrics. Tucked the pins into a jar. The mattress they brought in was thinner than I would have chosen, but it was only supposed to be temporary. That word again. Always temporary. But things stretched. Nico's business didn't come back. Brenna's consulting work was mostly phone calls and sighs. Ellie settled in like this had always been home. My framed photos, Gerald in his Air Force uniform, Nico as a boy with a paper crown, vanished one by one. Some I found stacked in the garage, others just gone. That night after dishes were done and Brenna went to soak in the bath I used to call mine, Nico sat beside me on the couch. There's some paperwork I'll need you to sign after the weekend, he said like he was asking me to pick up milk. I smiled softly. Of course I told him. But my fingers were already tightening around the armrest. I was up before the sun. The house was still no footsteps overhead, no running water, no Brenna shouting into her headset. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want anyone knowing I was awake. The file cabinet in the hall closet had a sticky drawer that always jammed if you pulled too fast. I eased it open and ran my fingers across the faded labels. Taxes. Health. House. When I found the envelope, I paused. My hands didn't tremble, not yet. I unfolded the deed slowly, like peeling back something sacred. And there it was, my name. Only mine. Eudora Ruth Maddox. Owner. No mention of Nico. No joint ownership. No added beneficiaries. I'd never changed it after Gerald died. Back then, I remember he said, "Keep the title clean. It's protection. You never know who'll come asking when you're not looking. I thought he meant strangers. The bank, the government. I never imagined I'd need protection from our own blood. I sat there on the hallway floor in my robe, the paper firm in my hand. I hadn't cried the night before, and I didn't now. But something deeper moved like the slow shifting of land before it splits. I reached for my phone and scrolled past the names I rarely used anymore. Lyle was near the top. We'd gone to high school together. He was sharp even then. Retired now, but always picked up for me. Eudora, he said, still groggy. You all right? No, I said calmly, but I'm getting there. He didn't need the whole story. Just a few details. His voice turned crisp. You've got the original deed, I do. Then don't wait. I won't. We made a plan, steps I could take, things to file, warnings to prepare for. I wrote it all down on the back of a grocery list. By the time the rest of the house woke up, the kettle was already whistling, and the documents were tucked safely under my mattress. I served breakfast like I always did. And I watched carefully when Brenna asked if I'd seen her missing bracelet. That afternoon, Nico brought me a cup of tea without being asked. He set it down gently, like I was fragile. Chamomile, he said. Thought it might help you relax. I thanked him. I didn't drink it. Brenna walked by a few minutes later, pausing in the doorway. That's a really nice sweater, Eudora. The color looks good on you. She'd never commented on my clothes before. She'd barely looked at them. I smiled. Thank you, dear. She nodded, almost surprised I hadn't questioned it. Later, I sat on the porch watching the wind tug at the last of the maple leaves. The screen door creaked, and Ellie came out with her phone in one hand and a blanket in the other. She sat beside me closer than usual. I was thinking, she said casually, maybe we should do one of those memory books together, like, before stuff starts slipping. I turned my head slowly. Slipping. She shrugged. Just, do you ever forget things lately? Like names or how to get places? My phone was in my pocket. I tapped the voice memo button without looking. She wasn't subtle. None of them were. And are you okay being alone during the day? She asked next, eyes still on her screen. Like if no one's around, do you get nervous? I laughed light and soft. Sweetheart, I raised a child without Google Maps and made a roast on a broken stove. I think I managed just fine. She didn't respond, just nodded slowly, like she was mentally filing away my answers. They weren't being kind. They were being careful. Careful in the way people are when they're laying something down beneath your feet. Something meant to break later. I stayed gentle, kept smiling. Let them think they were ahead. Monday morning, I wore my good coat and caught the first bus into town. I told them I had an errand at the pharmacy. That part wasn't a lie. I picked up my heart medication on the way back, but the real stop was at the credit union on Jefferson Street. I'd opened my first account there in 1976. The woman at the desk smiled politely until I slid my ID across and told her I needed to move everything. Savings, checking the CD that matured last spring, all of it, to where she asked. I handed her the name of a new institution in Salem. Do you want to close this account? No, I said, smiling. I want it to look full and feel empty. She blinked, then nodded like she understood more than she let on. Next, I asked to review authorized users. I'd let Brenna use one of my cards a while back. Just for groceries, she said then. We'll pay you back each month. They never did. I had the banker remove her name and freeze the card for good measure. Would you like to set up alerts? She asked. Yes. Every transaction, every login, every whisper of movement I want to know. By the time I left, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Control. That night, Brenna was in the kitchen, glass of wine in one hand, tapping her phone with the other. Declined, she muttered. What the hell? She tried again. I could hear the beeps from the hallway. Then louder, Nico. Did you cancel the grocery card I was buying tickets? Nico appeared in the doorway, annoyed and already defensive. Why would I cancel anything? They went back and forth. Blame ping-ponged like it always did when something didn't go their way. I listened while folding laundry. Not a twitch in my fingers. Not a blink. Let them panic. Let them wonder. The wall was up. Quiet. Solid. I sat at the kitchen table long after they'd gone to bed, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound left in the house. The printer wheezed softly as it pushed out page after page copies of the eviction notice. The property documents, the new bank authorizations. Everything Lyle told me I'd need. I didn't serve anything. Not yet. But the papers were real, signed and dated. The envelope sat sealed in my drawer, addressed to Nico and Brenna both. I stared at it for a long time. Not with fear. Not even sadness. Just confirmation. Lyle had gone over every detail that afternoon in his den, hunched over his desk with reading glasses too low on his nose. They have no legal claim, he said, flipping the papers back toward me. But that won't stop them from acting like they do. You know that. I nodded. I'm not trying to humiliate them, I said. You're protecting yourself, he replied. Nothing humiliating about that. On the bus ride home, I wrote out a short list in my notebook. Things worth keeping, things worth losing. It was shorter than I expected. My mother's ring. Gerald's watch. The quilt I'd never finished, but couldn't throw away. Everything else was replaceable or already gone in spirit. The next morning, I made pancakes with a smile. Poured coffee with steady hands. When they all sat down to eat, I cleared my throat gently. I thought maybe we could have dinner together Friday night, I said. Just the four of us. No phones, no distractions. Brenna blinked, surprised but intrigued. Nico grinned. Sure, Mom. That sounds nice. Ellie nodded without looking up. They accepted like they'd already won, like they thought I was softening. I nodded, folded my napkin, and excused myself to water the front porch plants. By Thursday evening, the house had stopped feeling like mine. It wasn't sadness, I felt it was relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for 2 years and was finally allowed to exhale. The boxes were stacked in 2 neat columns by the door, 12 in total. I counted them 3 times. I left the good towels. Brenna liked those, the soft gray ones with the stripe. I left the heavy dishware too. Nico always said the plates felt fancy. Let them keep the weight. I wanted none of it. Lyle's son Joel arrived just after dark with a rented van. He didn't ask questions, just nodded when I opened the door and handed him a list. These ones go in last, I said, pointing to the box marked fragile. Photos. He smiled. Got it. We moved quietly like guests sneaking out of a party no longer meant for us. I had no urge to look back down the hallway, no need to peek into rooms I once called mine. I took the quilt, Gerald's watch, the ring I wore only on Sundays, a tin of Earl Grey, and 1 bar of lavender soap I'd been saving for something better than this place had become. When the last box was secured, Joel waited for me by the van. I went back inside alone. In the center of the table where we'd all once laughed, I placed a sealed envelope. Inside was the notice to vacate. 30 days, signed, notarized, unmistakable. I didn't add a note. Didn't scribble anything extra on the back. No guilt, no second chances. Just paper and truth. I stood for a moment, one hand resting on the chair Nico always used. I didn't sit. I didn't cry. I just breathed in once, then turned out the kitchen light. By midnight, I was gone. And by morning, the house would feel quieter, emptier, in ways they wouldn't understand. The van pulled out slowly. Joel asked where we were headed. I told him, anywhere but here. The sun had barely risen when Nico banged on my bedroom door. I imagine his voice was loud, confused at first, then angry. Maybe he even rattled the knob, calling my name like I'd simply overslept. But the room was empty, the closet bare, the bed made with corners tucked sharp. Brenna found the envelope on the kitchen table. She read the first few lines out loud, her voice rising with every word. 30 days to vacate. Sole ownership. Failure to comply will result in legal action. She stopped before the end. Ellie sat on the couch in silence. Then she cried big, messy sobs that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with shock. Nico checked his phone, then his bank app. No access, no transfers. Just red text where his name used to sit beneath mine. Brenna tried the shared credit card. Denied. Again. Again. They opened the laptop, searched the property records. And there it was. Clear as anything. Owner Eudora Ruth Maddox. Alone. Always had been. They had spent months trying to maneuver me gently out of the way off the paperwork into a facility. They wanted a clean sweep. No fight. No mess. Instead, they got an empty house, a locked bank account, and a deadline. I wasn't cruel. I left the pantry stocked. The thermostat set. The December gas bill paid, but I also left a line in bold, "Do not contact me." They didn't plan for that. They planned for confusion, maybe resistance, but not for absence. Not for the quiet vacuum left behind when the woman who washed their clothes kept their lights on and disappeared into the background, simply vanished. I imagine the house felt different without my footsteps. No humming from the kitchen. No clink of spoons in morning coffee. Just 3 people sitting in a home they never really owned, realizing the walls didn't love them back. And a key mine wasn't under the mat anymore. The apartment near Salem was smaller than anything I'd ever lived in. Just 2 rooms and a galley kitchen with scuffed tile. But the windows faced the morning light, and when I turned the latch, the breeze came through clean. I bought new linens on my first full day there. Crisp cotton with a pale green trim. The last set I'd purchased was sometime before Gerald passed. Back then, I saved everything for someday. Now I let myself sleep soft. The library was a few blocks away. I signed up for the Thursday morning book club and was surprised how easily I spoke during the discussion. No one there asked where I'd come from or why my last name sounded familiar. They just handed me a cup of weak coffee and made space on the circle of chairs. My neighbor June knocked the second evening. She was holding a loaf of bread wrapped in a dish towel. "I bake when I get restless," she said. "Thought you might like some." I did. That night, I walked without a phone. Not because I was being brave, and not because I'd forgotten. I left it in the drawer because for the first time in years, no one was waiting to call. No questions, no schedules, no veiled demands dressed as concern. I passed by a house with wind chimes and smiled when they clinked in the breeze. The quiet wasn't empty, it was honest. A different kind of quiet than I'd known before. No tension hiding in it. No waiting for footsteps, slammed drawers, or backhanded comments. Each day started slowly. Tea. A book. Maybe a call to Lyle to ask about mail forwarding. Each night ended with a deep breath and sleep that came easy. I didn't check the news. I didn't wonder what they were doing. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood I didn't have to. And then 2 weeks in, I heard a knock. Not hurried, not angry, just steady. I opened the door and saw Ellie standing there, her backpack slung low and her eyes wide. She didn't look like the girl who used to roll her eyes at my stories. No mascara, no phone in her hand. Just a backpack and a jacket too thin for December. "Hi," she said like it was the only word that fit. I stepped aside without asking why she came. She stood in the middle of the living room like she didn't know where to place her hands. I offered her tea, lukewarm, already brewed. She nodded. We sat on the small porch cups between us, steam barely rising. "I don't want to be like them," she said after a long pause. No names, no details, but I knew who she meant. I didn't ask what they said after I left. I didn't need to. The fact that she was here alone said more than any update ever could. We didn't talk about the house, or the envelope, or what she must have seen that morning when her parents started opening drawers like answers might fall out. She didn't ask for anything. I didn't offer anything. Instead, we sat. The wind picked up once and made the porch railing creak. She pulled her knees up to her chest. I handed her the Afghan I kept by the door. There was no apology, no dramatic moment of forgiveness. Just a girl, my granddaughter, sitting beside me because maybe deep down she remembered who I was before they started rewriting me. We talked about the book I'd been reading. She asked if there was a library nearby. I told her we could go tomorrow if she liked. She said, okay. That was enough. She didn't ask if she could stay. I didn't say she could. But when I laid out an extra quilt that night and she slipped into the small second room without a word, I didn't stop her. Some things don't need permission. And some beginnings are quiet enough to miss if you don't lean in. The next morning, she made toast and asked if I had any jam. I did. And while we ate, I told her about the daffodils I was planning to plant come spring.